Now Jesus is in the boat with the disciples. Scene changes. And this is the place where Mark begins to connect the dots for us between blind people being healed and disciples who can't see the one that's standing in front of them. The disciples had forgotten to bring bread in the boat. They had one loaf for 13 grown men, so probably wouldn't go quite far enough. It feels like one of those things where maybe you've been on a car ride with somebody and you're thinking about something that happened maybe the day before and everybody else is having a conversation and all of a sudden you sort of say something out loud and no one else knows what you're talking about because you were having that inner monologue thing and they're thinking, what's he talking about? So Jesus is in the boat with the disciples and all of a sudden he says, be careful. Beware the yeast of the Pharisees and Herod. And the disciples are thinking, what do we miss? What's he talking about? We have a loaf of bread. What's all this about yeast? Maybe he's mad because we didn't bring any more bread. We had 7 whole baskets and we didn't think to bring any of it. And he's frustrated. What are we going to do? And so Jesus perceives that they're not following. Like, by the way, this is one of those places in the Bible where there's evidence for the trustworthiness of these texts. Let's just say if we were the apostles and we were making up stories about ourselves, we'd probably make ourselves look a little bit better than these guys. If you're telling bad stories about yourself, chances are it's true. Because most people don't tell lies that paint themselves poorly. So the disciples are painted very badly here. They look bad. They don't get it. They're dim-witted. They're in the dark. They don't perceive what Jesus is up to, and that's precisely what he says. They discussed with one another and said, is it because we have no bread? Why is he talking about yeast? And Jesus is aware of their discussion, and he asked them, why are you still talking about bread? Because that's not the point, is it? Why are you still talking about bread? Don't you see or understand? Are your hearts hardened? Do you have eyes but fail to see and ears but fail to hear? And all of a sudden, we're remembering that just a few passages ago, we heard about a guy who had ears that didn't work very well. And Jesus restored him. And Mark wants us to see this connection. That the physical healings point to Jesus' ability to heal spiritual handicaps. Now, this isn't a theme Mark made up off the start. It has Old Testament credentials. Consider the book of Isaiah. If you go back to the familiar narrative of Isaiah's vision of God in the temple and his calling, who will go for us? Isaiah, here I am, send me. And God's responding, I'm glad you've already volunteered without asking what we're sending you to do. Because here's what you can expect. A hard-hearted people who won't see what you're doing or understand. You can expect people to listen but not perceive, to see but not perceive. It's in Isaiah 6. Here I am, send me. All right, go and tell this people, be ever hearing but never understanding. Be ever seeing but never perceiving. Make the heart of this people callous, make their eyes dull and close their eyes. Isaiah, you're going to go, but you're going to meet blind people with hard hearts who aren't interested in what you have to say. Later on, this spiritual disability is connected to idolatry. Isaiah says, here's what idolatry's like. You take a log and you cut it in half. One half, you build a fire and you cook your soup for supper. The other half, you carve an idol for yourself, one of your gods. Implication, what kind of God could it really be if the same log was used to cook your supper? And you'll carve out this God, and because you know what he's supposed to look like, you'll carve a little face, and it'll have ears and eyes, a nose, and a mouth. But it turns out with idols, they have ears, but they can't hear your prayers. They have eyes, but they can't see your need. They've got mouths, you whittled it down. But they can never speak words of comfort and forgiveness over your sin. And then Isaiah draws the connection between idolatry and formation, or maybe we should call it deformation. Because people who worship false gods ultimately become like them. If you worship a God who has ears but can't hear, your spiritual sensitivity to hear God well is going to be muted. If you worship a false god who has eyes but can't see, your ability to see and perceive the work of God, Pharisees, will decline. If you worship blind gods, you'll become a blind person. However, in Isaiah, there's a promise. It comes in chapter 35. It's the day when the desert and the parched land will be glad. It's the day when the wilderness will rejoice and blossom. It's the day when God will rescue his people. Be strong, do not fear. Your God will come. He will come to save you. And this is what will happen, Isaiah says, when he comes to save you. Then will the eyes of the blind be opened, and the ears of the deaf unstopped. And the lame will leap like a deer, and the mute tongue shout for joy. For Isaiah, physical handicap or disability is an analogy or an illustration for a spiritual malady, spiritual disability, a spiritual insensitivity. My spiritual senses to perceive God don't work. But when God acts to save, he'll restore all of that. And so Mark gives us Jesus, who is alluding to Isaiah all over the place. Do you have ears but don't hear? Inviting us to recognize that the day of the new renewal is being launched in Jesus. After all, the mute speak, the deaf hear, the lame leap like a deer. The day of the renewal that the prophet anticipated is happening in front of them. And Jesus warns them about the yeast of the Pharisees and Herod, because like the idol worshipers of Isaiah's day, the Pharisees and the others see their God at work and do not recognize him, because their eyes are dim and their ears are closed.